Sarah Martinez adjusted her uniform sleeves one more time, making sure the black ink on her forearm remained hidden beneath the crisp white fabric. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Naval Support Activity Base in Norfolk, Virginia, casting long shadows across the polished floors. She had been working as a civilian contractor in the communications department for 3 months now, and despite her excellent work performance, she couldn't shake the feeling that some of her colleagues viewed her differently. The tattoo on her left forearm was simple yet meaningful to her, a black eagle with spread wings, surrounded by an anchor and trident with the words honor, courage, commitment written in elegant script below. To most people, it looked like a generic military-themed design that thousands of people got to show their patriotism or support for the armed forces. But to Sarah, it represented something much deeper, something she had never spoken about to anyone at her new workplace. As she walked through the corridor toward the communications center, Sarah passed a group of junior sailors who were discussing weekend plans. Their conversation died down as she approached, and she caught snippets of whispered comments behind her back. "Did you see that tattoo on the new contractor?" one of them said in a low voice. "Yeah, another wannabe trying to look tough with fake military ink," replied another with a dismissive laugh. "Probably got it at some strip mall tattoo parlor to impress guys at bars." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She had heard similar comments before, not just here, but at her previous job and even in casual social situations. People looked at her petite frame, her quiet demeanor, and her civilian status, and they assumed her tattoo was nothing more than a fashion statement or an attempt to appear more interesting than she actually was. The communications center buzzed with activity as Sarah settled into her workstation. Her job involved coordinating secure communications between various naval units, a position that required high-level security clearance and technical expertise. Despite the mockery she endured, Sarah excelled at her work. Her attention to detail was impeccable, her technical knowledge impressive, and her ability to remain calm under pressure had already saved the base from several potential communication failures. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, her direct supervisor, approached her desk with a stack of priority messages. He was one of the few people who treated her with genuine respect, though even he seemed puzzled by some aspects of her background. "Martinez, I need you to handle these classified communications today. We've got a joint training exercise coming up, and the brass wants everything running smoothly." He paused, studying her face. I've been meaning to ask. Your security clearance paperwork shows some interesting qualifications. Where exactly did you serve before coming here?" Sarah looked up from her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was the question she had been dreading, the one that could change everything. She had been deliberately vague about her past during the hiring process, providing only the minimum information required. "I worked in communications for a government contractor overseas," she replied carefully, which was technically true, though it barely scratched the surface of her actual experience. Lieutenant Commander Brooks nodded slowly, but Sarah could see the curiosity in his eyes. Her security clearance level was higher than most contractors, and her technical skills suggested military training that went far beyond basic communication protocols. As the morning progressed, Sarah threw herself into her work, coordinating secure channels and monitoring radio traffic. The familiar rhythm of military communications felt like second nature to her, and she found herself anticipating needs and solving problems before they fully developed. Her colleagues began bringing her more complex tasks, recognizing her expertise, even if they continued to make snide comments about her appearance. During lunch break, Sarah usually ate alone in a quiet corner of the base cafeteria. Today was no different, except that she overheard a conversation at the next table that made her blood boil. 3 sailors were discussing a recent news article about women in combat roles, and their opinions were less than progressive. "I don't care what anyone says," said Petty Officer Jenkins, a stocky man with a perpetual sneer. "Women don't belong in special operations. They don't have what it takes for real combat." "Exactly," agreed his companion. "All these contractors coming in here with their fake tattoos, pretending they understand what military service is really about. It's insulting to those of us who actually serve. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her covered forearm, her fingers tracing the outline of her tattoo through the fabric. If only they knew the truth about what that ink really represented, about the mission she had completed, about the teammates she had lost, about the sacrifices she had made for her country. But she remained silent, finishing her sandwich and returning to work. She had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when revealing the truth could compromise ongoing operations or put other people at risk. The afternoon brought news of an unexpected inspection. Word spread quickly through the communications center that high-ranking officials would be visiting the base tomorrow, including representatives from Naval Special Warfare Command. Sarah felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. These kinds of visits always made her nervous, not because she had anything to hide from a professional standpoint, but because they increased the chances of running into someone who might recognize her from her previous life. As she prepared the communication systems for the inspection, Sarah's mind wandered to the events that had led her to this civilian position. The transition from active duty to contractor work had been her choice, a decision made after years of service that few people could understand. The weight of classified operations, the constant deployments, the physical and emotional toll of special operations work, it had all become too much even for someone as dedicated as Sarah had been. Her tattoo was a reminder of that life, a permanent marker of achievements and experiences that she could never openly discuss. The eagle represented her airborne qualifications, the anchor symbolized her naval service, and the trident, well, the trident was the part that would shock her current colleagues the most. It was the symbol of naval special warfare, earned through one of the most grueling training programs in the military. As the workday ended, Sarah gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the base. Tomorrow's inspection would bring new challenges, and she hoped she could continue to fly under the radar as she had been doing. She pulled her sleeves down one more time, ensuring her tattoo remained hidden, and walked toward the exit. Behind her, the whispered comments continued among her colleagues, their assumptions and judgments following her like shadows. They saw a quiet contractor with a fake tattoo, someone trying too hard to fit into a world where she didn't belong. If only they knew that Sarah Martinez had belonged to this world longer and more deeply than any of them could imagine, and that tomorrow's inspection might just be the day when her carefully constructed civilian facade would finally crack. The evening air was cool as Sarah walked to her car, and for a moment, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to wear her tattoo with pride instead of shame. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she would try to forget about the mockery and the misunderstandings at least for a few hours. Little did she know that tomorrow's inspection would change everything, and that her secret would finally be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. Sarah arrived at the base earlier than usual the next morning, her stomach churning with anxiety about the inspection. The parking lot was already buzzing with activity as sailors and officers prepared for the visit from Naval Special Warfare Command. Black SUVs with tinted windows had begun arriving, and security personnel were conducting additional checks at the main gate. In the communications center, the atmosphere was tense but professional. Everyone knew that inspections from high-ranking officials could make or break careers, and the pressure to perform flawlessly was evident in every corner of the facility. Sarah methodically checked all her systems, ensuring that every communication channel was operating at peak efficiency. Lieutenant Commander Brooks approached her workstation, looking more stressed than she had ever seen him. "Martinez, I need you to monitor the secure channels during the inspection. If anything goes wrong with communications today, it could be a disaster for this entire base." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility he was placing on her shoulders. "You can count on me, sir. Everything will run smoothly." As the morning progressed, Sarah noticed the familiar faces of several high-ranking naval officers walking through the communications center. She kept her head down, focusing intently on her work while stealing occasional glances at the inspection team. Her heart rate increased when she recognized some of the uniforms and insignia. These weren't just regular Navy personnel, but members of the elite special operations community. The inspection was proceeding without incident until Petty Officer Jenkins decided to make his presence known. He had been particularly vocal about his opinions regarding civilian contractors, and today seemed like the perfect opportunity to showcase his superior knowledge in front of the visiting officials. "Sir," Jenkins addressed one of the inspecting officers, "I wanted to point out some concerns about the civilian contractors working in sensitive positions here." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized Jenkins was walking directly toward her workstation. Several other sailors had gathered around, sensing drama in the air. "This contractor here," Jenkins continued, gesturing toward Sarah, "has been working in communications, but some of us have questions about her qualifications. She even has this fake military tattoo that she probably got to try to fit in with real service members." The inspecting officer, a stern-looking man with silver hair and numerous ribbons on his chest, followed Jenkins' gaze toward Sarah. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room focused on her, and her hands trembled slightly as she continued typing. "What seems to be the issue, Petty Officer?" the inspector asked, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military service. Jenkins smirked, clearly enjoying the attention. "Well, sir, she's got this tattoo on her arm that's supposed to look military, but it's obvious she just got it to impress people. It's got an eagle and anchor and some other stuff that's probably copied from a website." The room fell silent, except for the gentle humming of electronic equipment. Sarah felt her face burning with embarrassment and anger. She had endured months of these accusations, but having them aired publicly during an official inspection was humiliating beyond words. "Miss," the inspector addressed Sarah directly, "could you please show us this tattoo that's causing such concern?" Sarah's hands stopped moving across the keyboard. This was the moment she had been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. She looked around the room at the faces staring at her, some curious, some dismissive, some openly hostile. Slowly, she pushed back her chair and stood up. With deliberate movements, she began rolling up the sleeve of her left arm, revealing the black ink that had been hidden for so long. The eagle's wings spread across her forearm, the anchor and trident clearly visible beneath, and the words honor, courage, commitment written in precise military script. Jenkins leaned forward, ready to deliver another cutting remark about the quality of civilian tattoo work, but the inspector stepped closer, his expression changing dramatically as he studied the design. "Where exactly did you get this tattoo?" the inspector asked quietly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the entire room. Sarah met his eyes directly for the first time. "Naval Special Warfare Training Center, Coronado, California, sir." The inspector's face went pale. He leaned in closer, examining specific details of the tattoo that weren't visible from a distance. Other members of the inspection team had gathered around, their casual interest transforming into intense focus. "The detail work around the trident," the inspector murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "The specific positioning of the anchor. The font used for the text." He looked up at Sarah with new respect. "This isn't just any military tattoo, is it?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, sir. It's not." The room was so quiet that the sound of air conditioning seemed deafening. Jenkins looked confused, glancing between Sarah and the inspector as if trying to understand what he was missing. "Could you tell us more about when and where you received this particular design?" another inspector asked, his voice carrying the same reverence as his colleague. Sarah took a deep breath. "I received it after completing basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, sir. It was done by the same artist who had tattooed most of my class. He specialized in commemorative ink for special operations graduates." The words hit the room like a thunderbolt. Several sailors audibly gasped, while others leaned forward in disbelief. Jenkins' smug expression had completely disappeared, replaced by confusion and growing alarm. "Ma'am," the lead inspector said, his entire demeanor having shifted from casual inspection to something approaching reverence. "Are you telling us that you're a graduate of BUD/S?" "Yes, sir. Class 234. The number meant nothing to most people in the room, but The inspector's reactions made it clear that it meant everything to them. One of them immediately pulled out his phone, presumably to verify information that Sarah had just provided. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, who had been watching the exchange with growing amazement, stepped forward. "Martinez, why didn't you mention this during your hiring process?" Sarah looked at her supervisor, then at the crowd of people surrounding her workstation. "Because I wanted to start fresh, sir. I want to be judged on my current work performance, not on my past service. And, frankly, I was tired of people not believing me when I did mention it." She gestured toward Jenkins, who was now looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "As you can see, most people assume that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly have completed special operations training." The lead inspector nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, that's an attitude we encounter far too often." He turned to address the entire room. "For those of you who don't understand what we're discussing here, this woman has completed one of the most challenging military training programs in existence. Less than 20% of candidates who attempt BUD/S actually graduate." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And in her class, she was one of only 3 candidates to complete the entire program without being recycled or requiring additional training time." The room erupted in whispered conversations as people tried to process this information. Sarah could see the shock and disbelief on faces that had been mocking her just minutes earlier. "But, sir," Jenkins stammered, clearly struggling to accept what he was hearing, "she's just a contractor. She works in communications. If she really went through SEAL training, why isn't she still active duty?" The lead inspector's expression hardened as he turned toward Jenkins. "That, petty officer, is none of your business. What I will tell you is that this woman has served her country with more distinction and courage than you can possibly imagine." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as her secret was finally revealed. Part of her was grateful that the truth was out, but another part worried about how this revelation would change her carefully constructed civilian life. The inspection team spent the next hour asking Sarah detailed questions about her service history, verifying information that confirmed her claims. With each answer, the respect in the room grew, while the embarrassment of those who had mocked her became more apparent. As the official inspection concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by colleagues who suddenly saw her in a completely different light. The quiet contractor with a fake tattoo had been revealed as one of the most elite warriors their country had ever produced. But the biggest surprise was yet to come, and it would arrive in the form of someone Sarah had never expected to see again, someone whose presence would change everything she thought she knew about her new civilian life. The afternoon following Sarah's revelation brought an unexpected calm to the communications center. Word had spread throughout the base about the contractor who had turned out to be a former Navy SEAL, and the atmosphere around her had shifted completely. Instead of whispered mockery, Sarah now noticed respectful nods and curious glances from personnel who had previously dismissed her. Lieutenant Commander Brooks had called her into his office immediately after the inspection team concluded their morning review. His expression was a mixture of amazement and slight embarrassment as he gestured for her to take a seat. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he began, settling behind his desk. "When I reviewed your file during the hiring process, I saw the high security clearance and specialized qualifications, but the details were classified. I had no idea about your actual service record." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Sir, I specifically requested that my full service history remain classified during the hiring process. I wanted to prove myself in this position without the baggage that comes with my background." Brooks leaned forward, studying her face. "Baggage? Sarah, you're a decorated special operations veteran. Most people would consider that an asset, not baggage." Sarah's expression darkened slightly. "With respect, sir, you'd be surprised how many people react negatively when they learn about my past. Some think I'm lying because I don't fit their image of what a SEAL should look like. Others become intimidated and treat me like some kind of dangerous weapon. And some," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "some assume that a woman who went through that training must be damaged or unstable." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. "Come in," Brooks called out, and his aide entered with a concerned expression. Sir, there's a Commander Jackson here from Naval Special Warfare Command. He's asking to speak with Ms. Martinez privately. He says it's urgent. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She knew exactly who Commander Jackson was, and his presence here could only mean one thing. Her carefully constructed civilian life was about to become much more complicated. Send him in, Brooks replied, then turned to Sarah. Do you know this officer? Before Sarah could answer, the door opened and Commander Daniel Jackson stepped into the office. He was exactly as Sarah remembered him, tall, lean, with sharp gray eyes and a bearing that commanded immediate respect. His uniform displayed numerous ribbons and badges that spoke of extensive combat experience and specialized training. Martinez, Jackson said simply, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and something that might have been disappointment. Commander, Sarah replied, standing and coming to attention despite her civilian status. Jackson looked at Brooks. Lieutenant Commander, I need to speak with Ms. Martinez privately. This concerns classified operations and personnel matters. Brooks nodded and excused himself, leaving Sarah alone with her former commanding officer. The silence stretched between them until Jackson finally spoke. Stand easy, Martinez. We're not in the field anymore. He studied her civilian clothes and the way she had tried to blend into this new environment. Though it seems you've done everything possible to forget that you ever were. Sarah remained standing, her posture still military straight despite the casual setting. Sir, I completed my service obligation. I have every right to pursue civilian employment. Jackson walked to the window, looking out at the base activities. You disappeared, Sarah. One day you were part of my team. The next day, you were processing out without explanation. Do you have any idea how many people have been looking for you? The use of her first name caught Sarah off guard. Jackson had always been strictly professional during their previous interactions, even during the most dangerous missions they had shared. I completed all required debriefings and separation procedures, Sarah replied, though she could hear the defensiveness in her own voice. Jackson turned back to face her. Yes, you followed protocol perfectly, but you also declined every attempt at continued contact, refused veteran support services, and essentially vanished from the special operations community completely. He gestured toward the communications equipment visible through the office window. And now I find you working as a civilian contractor, hiding your service record like it's something to be ashamed of. Sarah's composure finally cracked. Ashamed? Commander, I gave 8 years of my life to special operations. I completed missions that I can never talk about, lost teammates whose names I can never mention, and carried out orders that haunt me every night. Her voice rose slightly, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. I watched good people die in places that don't exist for reasons that were classified above my pay grade. And when I finally decided I couldn't take anymore, I was told I was suffering from adjustment issues and needed psychological evaluation. Jackson's expression softened slightly. Sarah, that evaluation was standard procedure. After what happened in Afghanistan, don't, Sarah interrupted sharply. Don't talk about Afghanistan. That's exactly why I left. Every conversation became about Afghanistan. Every performance review mentioned Afghanistan. Every interaction with command was filtered through the lens of what happened in Afghanistan. The room fell silent again. Jackson had been Sarah's commanding officer during the classified operation she was referencing, and he clearly remembered the events that had led to her decision to leave active duty. You saved 7 lives that day, Jackson said quietly. Including mine. Sarah laughed bitterly. And I lost 3. The mathematics of that situation aren't as clean as everyone wants to pretend. Jackson approached her, his expression serious. Is that why you're hiding here? Working in communications instead of using your actual skills. Sarah met his eyes directly. I'm not hiding, Commander. I am rebuilding. There's a difference. Before Jackson could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the base. Both Sarah and Jackson immediately shifted into alert mode, their conversation forgotten as emergency protocols activated. Through the office window, they could see personnel running toward the communications center. Sarah's professional instincts kicked in immediately. That's a priority alpha communication failure, she explained to Jackson while moving toward the door. All secure channels just went down simultaneously. Jackson followed her as she rushed back to the communications center, where chaos was rapidly developing. Multiple workstations were displaying error messages, and officers were shouting orders as they tried to understand what had happened. Lieutenant Commander Brooks spotted Sarah immediately. Martinez, thank God. All our secure communications just crashed. We've lost contact with 3 ships at sea and a submarine that's supposed to be running a classified exercise. Sarah was already moving toward her workstation, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as she began diagnostic procedures. This isn't a random failure, she announced after a few seconds of analysis. Someone has actively compromised our systems. Jackson stepped up behind her, watching as she worked with a speed and precision that impressed even him. Cyber attack? Sophisticated one, Sarah replied without looking up from her screens. They knew exactly which protocols to target to cause maximum disruption without triggering standard security measures. Around them, other technicians were struggling with basic troubleshooting procedures while Sarah systematically traced the source of the intrusion. Her training in special operations had included extensive work with communication systems and cyber warfare, knowledge that was proving invaluable in this crisis. I've got partial communications restored to 2 of the ships, Sarah announced. But the submarine is still dark, and whoever did this is still in our system. Jackson watched Sarah work with growing admiration. This was the operator he remembered, calm under pressure, technically brilliant, and absolutely focused on mission success. Her civilian contractor facade had completely disappeared, replaced by the elite warrior he had once commanded. How long until you can locate the intrusion source? Jackson asked. Sarah's hands never stopped moving across the keyboards. I'm not just going to find them, she replied with a grimness that reminded Jackson of the old days. I'm going to turn their own attack against them. The crisis was far from over, but for the first time since the alarms had started, Jackson felt confident that they were going to win this battle. And he was beginning to understand why Sarah Martinez had been so determined to prove herself without relying on her past achievements. She was about to demonstrate that some skills never fade, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury them. The communication center had transformed into a war zone of activity as Sarah worked frantically to counter the cyber attack that had crippled the base's secure systems. Commander Jackson stood behind her, watching as she executed counter-intrusion protocols that most technicians had only read about in classified manuals. Got them, Sarah announced after 20 minutes of intense keyboard work. The attack is originating from 3 separate locations, 2 domestic and 1 overseas. They're using a sophisticated botnet to mask their actual position. Lieutenant Commander Brooks leaned over her shoulder, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried to follow her rapid-fire technical explanations. Can you stop them? Sarah's eyes never left the screens as her fingers continued their complex dance across multiple keyboards. I'm not just going to stop them. I'm going to trace them back to their source and lock them out permanently. Jackson recognized the tone in her voice. It was the same calm determination she had displayed during combat operations, when failure wasn't an option and lives hung in the balance. Sarah, Jackson said quietly, using her first name again. The submarine that's gone dark, that's the USS Hampton. They're running a classified exercise in hostile waters. If we don't re-establish contact soon, they could be in serious danger. Sarah's jaw tightened as she absorbed this information. The USS Hampton carried 134 crew members, and if they were operating in hostile territory without secure communications, they were essentially blind and vulnerable. I need direct system access, Sarah announced, turning to Brooks. Not just contractor-level permissions. I need full administrative control. Brooks hesitated. Martinez, I don't have the authority to grant that level of access to a civilian contractor, even in an emergency. Jackson stepped forward. Ido. He pulled out his command credentials and placed them on Sarah's desk. Emergency authorization Alpha 77. Full system access granted. Sarah looked at the credentials, then at Jackson. Sir, if I use these authorizations, there's going to be a paper trail. Questions will be asked about why a civilian contractor had access to classified counter-intrusion protocols. Jackson met her eyes steadily. Let me worry about the paperwork, Martinez. Just get our people home safe. Sarah nodded and began implementing security protocols that went far beyond anything a typical communications contractor would know. Her years of special operations training had included extensive work with cyber warfare and electronic intelligence, skills that had been developed through countless classified missions. As she worked, other personnel in the communications center began to gather around her workstation. They watched in amazement as Sarah systematically dismantled the cyber attack, not just defending against it, but actively turning it back against the attackers. Petty Officer Jenkins, who had been conspicuously absent since the morning's humiliating revelation about Sarah's background, appeared at the edge of the crowd. His face showed a mixture of shame and growing respect as he watched Sarah work with a level of expertise that far exceeded anything he had ever witnessed. There, Sarah announced suddenly. I've re-established contact with the Hampton. They're safe, but they were under electronic surveillance for the past 30 minutes. Someone was trying to track their position and movements. Brooks grabbed a secure phone to relay the information to higher command while Jackson continued to watch Sarah work. She hadn't just restored communications. She was systematically hunting down every trace of the cyber intrusion, ensuring that the attackers couldn't try this again. The domestic attack points have been neutralized, Sarah reported, but the overseas source is more sophisticated. They're using military-grade encryption and counter-surveillance techniques. Jackson leaned closer. How sophisticated? Sarah paused, her expression growing grim. Commander, this isn't some random cybercriminal group. The techniques they're using, the specific systems they targeted, this has the hallmarks of state-sponsored cyber warfare. The implications of her statement sent a chill through everyone within hearing distance. If a foreign government had successfully penetrated a U.S. naval base's secure communications, it represented a significant national security breach. Can you trace them? Jackson asked. Sarah's fingers resumed their rapid movement across the keyboards. I can try, but if I'm right about who we're dealing with, they'll have multiple layers of protection and false trails. For the next hour, Sarah engaged in what could only be described as cyber combat. She probed and attacked, defended, and counterattacked using skills that went far beyond typical information technology work. Jackson watched in fascination as she employed techniques that he knew were classified at the highest levels. Finally, Sarah leaned back in her chair with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. Got them. I've not only traced the source, but I've planted tracking software in their system. The next time they try to access any U.S. military network, we'll be waiting for them. The communications center erupted in applause, but Sarah barely seemed to notice. She was already running final diagnostic checks to ensure that all systems were secure and functioning properly. Jackson placed a hand on her shoulder. Outstanding work, Martinez. That was some of the finest cyber warfare execution I've ever witnessed. Sarah looked up at him, and for a moment, the barrier she had built around her civilian identity completely dissolved. Just doing my job, sir. No, Jackson replied firmly. That wasn't just a job. What you did here today probably saved lives and prevented a major intelligence breach. That's the kind of work that gets people medals and commendations. Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Commander Brooks returned with several high-ranking officers, including the base commander. Word of the cyber attack, and its resolution had reached the highest levels of command, and everyone wanted to understand exactly what had happened. Ms. Martinez, the base commander addressed her directly. I've just finished briefing Pentagon officials on this incident. They want a full report on your counter-intrusion methods and your assessment of the threat level. Sarah felt the familiar weight of official attention settling on her shoulders. This was exactly the kind of visibility she had been trying to avoid, the reason she had chosen to work as a quiet contractor rather than pursuing a high-profile career in cybersecurity. Sir, I could provide a technical briefing, but I'd prefer to keep my involvement as low profile as possible. The base commander looked puzzled. Martinez, what you accomplished here today is extraordinary. This is the kind of work that builds careers and opens doors to the highest levels of government service. Jackson stepped forward. Sir, if I may explain, Ms. Martinez has valid personal reasons for preferring to avoid publicity. However, her skills are obviously invaluable to national security. Sarah looked at Jackson gratefully, recognizing that he was trying to protect her privacy while acknowledging her contribution. The base commander nodded slowly. Very well. We'll handle the official reports appropriately. But, Martinez, I hope you'll consider that your country needs people with your abilities in more prominent positions. As the senior officers dispersed to handle the aftermath of the incident, Sarah found herself alone with Jackson once again. The excitement of the crisis had faded, leaving her feeling drained and exposed. You can't keep hiding from what you are, Jackson said quietly. Today proved that your skills are needed, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. Sarah looked at her workstation, where normal communications traffic was flowing smoothly once again. Commander, I built this civilian life because I needed something normal, something predictable. What happened today is exactly why I left active duty. Jackson studied her face. Because you're too good at it? Sarah met his eyes. Because I can't seem to escape it. No matter how far I run or how deeply I bury my past, situations like this keep finding me. And every time they do, I get pulled back into a world that I'm not sure I want to be part of anymore. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then, he pulled a card from his wallet and placed it on her desk. Sarah, I came here today to offer you something. A chance to use your skills in a new way for a new kind of mission. Not the same old special operations work that burned you out, but something different. Sarah looked at the card but didn't pick it up. What kind of mission? The kind where people like the crew of the USS Hampton get to go home to their families because someone with your skills was there to protect them, Jackson replied. The kind where you get to be the guardian angel that most people never even know existed. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Think about it, Martinez. Your country needs you, but more importantly, you need to forgive yourself for being exceptional at something that matters. As Jackson left, Sarah stared at the card on her desk. She could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her, see the new respect in their expressions, and sense the weight of expectations that came with having her abilities revealed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new choices. But tonight, for the first time in years, Sarah Martinez felt like she might finally be ready to stop running from who she really was. 3 weeks had passed since the cyber attack that had changed everything for Sarah Martinez. The communications center at Naval Support Activity Norfolk hummed with its usual activity, but the atmosphere around Sarah had transformed completely. Where once there had been whispered mockery and dismissive glances, there was now a respectful acknowledgement of her expertise and background. Sarah sat at her workstation, reviewing the morning's communication traffic, when Lieutenant Commander Brooks approached with a familiar figure walking beside him. Commander Jackson had returned, and this time he wasn't alone. A woman in a crisp civilian suit accompanied him, her bearing and sharp eyes suggesting a background in intelligence work. Martinez, Brooks said, Commander Jackson is here with someone who'd like to speak with you. Sarah looked up from her screens, noting the serious expressions on both visitors' faces. Jackson stepped forward first. Sarah, I'd like you to meet Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Division. She's been following up on the incident from 3 weeks ago. Dr. Vasquez extended her hand with a professional smile. Ms. Martinez, it's an honor to meet you. Your work during the cyber attack has generated significant interest at the highest levels of government. Sarah shook the offered hand cautiously. Dr. Vasquez, I assume this isn't a social visit. You're correct, Vasquez replied. I'm here to discuss some developments that have emerged from your counter-intrusion work. Could we speak privately? Sarah glanced at Brooks, who nodded his approval. The three of them moved to a small conference room adjacent to the communications center, where Vasquez spread several classified folders on the table. MS. Martinez, the tracking software you planted in the attacker's system has been extraordinarily productive, Vasquez began. We've uncovered a network of cyber intrusions that spans multiple countries and involves several hostile intelligence services. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued despite her reservations. How extensive? Jackson answered, they've been systematically probing U.S. military communication networks for months, possibly years. Your intervention not only stopped their attack, but gave us a window into their entire operation. Vasquez opened one of the folders, revealing satellite photos and technical diagrams. We've identified their primary operations center, located several key personnel, and, most importantly, we've discovered that they're planning a major coordinated attack on multiple naval installations. Sarah studied the documents, her analytical mind immediately grasping the implications of what she was seeing. When our intelligence suggests within the next 2 weeks, Vasquez replied. They're targeting 5 different naval bases simultaneously, including this one. The room fell silent as Sarah absorbed this information. She could see where this conversation was heading, and part of her wanted to stop it before it went any further. Ms. Martinez, Vasquez continued, we need your help. Not as a civilian contractor, but as someone with your unique combination of special operations training and cyber warfare expertise. Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Dr. Vasquez, I left active duty for very specific reasons. I'm not interested in returning to that world. Jackson leaned forward. Sarah, this isn't about returning to special operations. This is about using your skills to prevent an attack that could compromise national security and put thousands of service members at risk. Sarah looked between the two of them, recognizing the careful way they were presenting their request. What exactly are you asking me to do? Vasquez opened another folder, revealing detailed technical specifications. We need you to lead a small team in developing and implementing counter-intrusion protocols for all 5 targeted bases. Your tracking software has given us an advantage, but we need someone with your expertise to turn that advantage into a comprehensive defense. And Jackson added, we need someone who can think like the attackers, someone who understands both the technical and tactical aspects of this kind of operation. Sarah studied the documents more carefully, noting the sophistication of the planned attack. Despite her reluctance to return to high-stakes government work, she couldn't deny the professional challenge that the situation presented. What kind of team are we talking about? She asked, surprising herself at the question. Vasquez smiled slightly, recognizing that Sarah was beginning to engage with the problem. A hand-picked group of the best cyber warfare specialists from each service branch, plus some civilian experts. You would be the team leader, with full authority to implement whatever measures you deem necessary. And after this operation? Sarah asked. What happens then? Jackson met her eyes directly. That's entirely up to you. We're not trying to trap you back into a career you've chosen to leave. We're asking for your help with one specific mission, with the understanding that you're free to return to your civilian life afterward, if that's what you choose. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the base where she had built her quiet, predictable routine. She thought about the crew of the USS Hampton, about the 134 sailors who had been in danger during the cyber attack, about the thousands of other service members who could be at risk if this new attack succeeded. There's something else, Vasquez said quietly. The intelligence we've gathered suggests that the group behind these attacks was also responsible for previous incidents involving special operations personnel. Incidents that resulted in casualties. Sarah turned back to face them, her expression hardening. Are you talking about Afghanistan? Jackson nodded grimly. Among other places, the communication disruptions that led to the loss of support during several classified missions. We now believe they were deliberate attacks, not equipment failures. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The teammates she had lost, the missions that had gone wrong due to communication failures, they might not have been random tragedies, but deliberate acts of warfare. Sarah returned to the table and picked up one of the technical documents, studying it with new intensity. If I agree to this, I want complete operational authority. No interference from bureaucrats who don't understand the technical requirements. Vasquez nodded. You'll have whatever authority you need. And I want to choose my own team members, Sarah continued. No political appointments or personnel who haven't proven themselves in actual cyber warfare situations. Agreed, Jackson replied. Sarah looked at both of them, recognizing that she was about to step back into the world she had tried so hard to leave behind. But this time it felt different. This wasn't about following orders or completing missions that she couldn't fully understand. This was about protecting people and preventing attacks that could affect thousands of innocent service members. When do we start? Sarah asked. Vasquez smiled with genuine relief. Immediately. We've already arranged for temporary duty assignments for the personnel we think you'll want on your team. You can review their files and make your selections by tomorrow. As the meeting concluded and the official papers were signed, Sarah found herself once again committed to serving her country in a capacity that utilized her most specialized skills. But this time, she wasn't hiding who she was or apologizing for her abilities. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, looking at the card that Jackson had left on her desk weeks earlier. She had finally called the number on it, accepting not just the immediate mission, but the possibility of a future that combined her need for meaningful work with her desire to serve something larger than herself. She rolled up her sleeve and looked at the tattoo that had caused so much confusion and controversy. The eagle, the anchor, the trident, and the words honor, courage, commitment. They weren't just decorative ink anymore. They were a reminder of who she had always been and who she was ready to be again. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the base early, but this time she didn't hide her tattoo beneath long sleeves. As she walked through the communications center, she noticed the respectful nods from colleagues who had once dismissed her, the curious but admiring glances from personnel who had heard about her background. Petty Officer Jenkins approached her workstation hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice showing genuine remorse. "I wanted to apologize for the things I said about your tattoo and your service. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Sarah looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted, Jenkins. We've all made assumptions about people that turn out to be wrong." As Sarah began her new mission, she realized that her journey from hidden contractor to acknowledged expert had taught her something important about the value of both humility and confidence. She had learned that sometimes the best way to prove yourself is to simply do the work, regardless of what others think or say. Her tattoo would never again be a source of shame or something to hide. It was a symbol of achievement, sacrifice, and commitment, a permanent reminder that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the battle might be. The mission ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, Sarah Martinez felt ready to face it as exactly who she was, a warrior, a protector, and a guardian of those who served alongside her.